We have begun.
Oh, yes. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Truckcast. Today I'm joined, as usual, by my soft spoken co host, Englander. And
Greetings.
later on, we may be joined by some other guests from one of my favorite Discord servers, the Iron Age Arc, or Iron Age Arch, however you want to pronounce it. It is spelt with a CH, but it's short for Iron Age Archive, I believe. So it might be pronounced as Arc. Uh,
Well, I guess I don't actually. I'm not actually a member of this group. So, what is Iron Age Archive?
if you can, they've got a YouTube channel that I think you'll rather like. It's a bunch of what's it? You know how there's a lot of people that are sort of adjacent to the academic agent.
Mm-hmm.
And the Iron Age arc is sort of like adjacent to that. Uh,
I see. Yeah.
they they originally came from a YouTube channel called the Asian Capitalists that was sort of like back what's it 2016 was one hell of a drug, wasn't it? And everybody was all happy because of Trump and you had the whole libertarian right and the epic shit posting and all,
Those were
all
the
that sort of
days.
thing. Yes, the old halcyon days of 2016.
It's a
When we
pitiful
when
state of
we uh, when
affairs to
we
be looking
owned the
fondly upon
libs and
2016.
yes, as it almost feels like cringe looking back on it, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well. Yeah. Exactly. We've moved on from then, so we've learnt our lessons. We're no longer kind of focusing on the SJWs and the radical feminists and all that sort of thing. It's become a lot
We
more.
do a bit, but only when they stick their finger in our soup, so to speak.
Yeah, it's not like wasting energy on them though. It's just
Yeah, we're not defined merely by our opposition, anymore. There are some things that we support, and we're
ooh
still working it
yes.
out. It's early days yet, but
Reminds me of the
we've
negative visions video that
yes.
academic agent did.
Yes, I'd say that in the past, the right was sort of defined by an almost exclusively negative vision, but
Yes, well I'm of the personal opinion that a positive vision is preferable to one that is to the one that was proposed by AA. Because mainly because
yes,
it's just I don't want to have a movement ran by hatred of the other, um, and
yeah.
that to be
Well,
what
like the
we are
thing is
identified as.
I would say thing is, it's like you can't. What's it? So you gotta have both essentially. It's like you can't run. I would say, and forgive me, as we were just talking earlier about being, like
Oh no.
horrible milquetoast fence centers and all that. Is you need to have both things. I think it's like the what's it the Schmittian friend enemy distinction. Having friends means nothing if you don't have enemies, and having enemies means nothing if you don't have friends.
Mm,
So like the positive and the negative vision need to work in tandem.
yeah. So yeah, I guess that is quite true. Really, a blend um, is necessary, but as I said, a negative vision on its own is not very it's not good for a movement, I would say, because it's either for its long term or short term prospects.
Yeah.
Mainly because if you displace say if you displace our current elites, then what are you going to replace it with? If it's merely something that you if you're just anti something, then what are you going to put in place afterwards?
Yeah,
You could
it's
very well
it's
end up
not
with
it's
some
not a firm. Yeah,
you could very well end up with something that's just another side of the same coin,
worse.
or worse. Yeah.
Uh, um. Yes, I would say. Now, of course. Oh my goodness, I've almost forgotten to make the proper introduction. So, as I
Oh
am
yes.
as I'm sure you are all aware, Barack Obama has 578,000 YouTube subscribers. If we work together, we can stop this. By which I mean we can surpass him. Yes, we must. We must beat Barack Obama. Yes.
Is he just
Oh, there
your
goes.
version of AA's Blair? We're just gonna. It's the arch enemy.
Bit, yeah. Bit, yeah. Well, no. Well, actually, my arch enemy is
that
what's it? My proper arch nemesis is Vingul, my dear friend in the server, who's hardly ever on because he's unlike us, he's a grown ass man, and he's very busy with his job most of the time.
I've just realised, are we stream sniping AA at the moment? We're obviously I'm sure we're going.
I don't know. Well, we're not live streaming,
sorry.
You know, so
yes.
I would say no.
Yes, forgive me. I keep making that mistake.
Well, I mean, we could if you wanted to.
No, it's all right.
Okay.
One day I will get this right. That we are. This is a podcast, not a stream.
Yes. You know what? No, the live stream will be for the 100 subscriber special.
Yeah, good idea.
And maybe a bit of face reveal too. Myself at the very least, since I am the main host. Perhaps somebody else.
Well, I know what you look like through your Instagram, but you've never seen me. As we've said before, I could be some, I don't know, black lesbian for you.
You could be a woman.
I could be a woman. I could be anything.
Yeah.
I might not even
you could
be
be
a
an
human.
Australian.
Yeah.
Ooh. You might just be an octopus with Excelsior, with absolutely amazing computer skills.
Yes. I mean, it's interesting.
Be infinite monkeys on infinite typewriters.
Yeah. It's interesting because Harambe actually, the first time we talked to each other, he assumed I was Australian, which is interesting.
I mean, to be fair, you've not got the most posh London accent.
No.
You know, and he is from Canada, you know, so his idea of a British person is very much, you know, it's you know, well, like most people from North America, he very much thinks of the posh London man who sort of walks into a room and instantly commands it.
Yeah.
He thinks of a rather extinct specimen.
Like the kind of, the very, very received pronunciation. The old BBC types who comment on sort of all the news. Well, unfortunately they're long gone, but yes, perhaps I'm a pale imitation.
Oh yes. Well, I mean, frankly speaking, but we shouldn't be surprised that they're gone. You know, there's just not the colleges necessary to sustain them.
No. Yeah, and
you know, the universities aren't the quality.
Yeah, and just the fact that the lovely thing that we're speaking through, the internet, has arisen, where it has, and just general communication, which has slowly watered down the accents. Mainly why you see the older generations hold their accents more. It tends to be stronger.
Yeah. Yes. It is very much that way sometimes. Oh yes, now is as we were saying earlier, no, it's we made a did we already, you know, bring this up in the podcast, you know, as we were talking about the rights versus responsibility sort of thing, you know, basically just like a thing that I was thinking about, you know, is that might make the Constitution of Dawnshire a bit stronger and somewhat more immune to corruption, you know, when compared to the American and other constitutions, is that well, perhaps like the first thing, the primary thing that all emphasis is put on is responsibilities, not rights. You know, that's not to disregard rights or say that they're unimportant, you know, because they are important, but Uh, no, it's like I figure it's probably fair to say that what's it? Your rights essentially only exist because everybody, um, well, because people fulfill their responsibilities, you know.
Yeah, and I think rights
Like
as
the
well are sort of inherently intrinsic to everyone. You don't have to make any effort or work for it, whereas responsibilities you actually have to put effort in to fulfill and to hold. It's
yes.
with you know with
Now, of course, what's
with
if you wanted to
human
be real dark, real doomer pilled, you would just be like AA and say that human rights don't exist. But I don't think either of us are quite that
no,
depressed yet.
well, human rights is just kind of it's like theory, isn't it? Whether they may be
Yeah.
there, but whether you're going to
Yeah, but of course,
have any fulfilled or not is the other question.
yeah. Also, I would say is what's it like? Human rights is like it's almost you're almost worrying about the like the wrong problem, you know, because like what's it? It's like it is not the concern of like this or that particular government. It's not they shouldn't be worried about the rights of all humans around the world. They should be worried about the rights of their particular citizens in their particular jurisdiction because that is what they actually can influence and have control over.
Mm,
So I would say that the idea of universal human rights is, regardless of whether it may or may not be corrupt in the sense that it really doesn't exist, it it is true to say that it doesn't exist so far as so far as usefulness is concerned, you know, from a practical
yeah,
standpoint.
well, and their
It doesn't exist
feasibility.
because there's no way to enforce it. Yeah.
Well, I mean,
um
there is one way. There's neoconservatism, where you just bomb the countries that disobey what you view human rights as.
yes. As opposed to just open imperialism, which is more so what I would advocate. You know, it's like what's it?
If you want to invade a
You know,
country,
like
just
if we
say,
want, yes, what's it like Russia for all of Russia's nonsense. At least what's it? Well, no, I would say it's like the what's it? Like Russia is not just bad because they're invading Ukraine. They're also quite bad because they've got the whole pretense of like peacekeepers and denazification and all sorts of nonsense like that. You know, it's
mm,
they're not just being honest conquistadors the way they ought to be.
I feel like they're yes, that I don't know if they're intentionally imitating Western morality by saying they want to denazify areas, but
I think
it's
that's
obviously
probably exactly what they're doing because when you look at like the Soviet Union, there was no denazification efforts in Eastern Germany the same
no,
way there was in Western Germany.
no,
So I don't think it's really that the Russians actually care about Nazism. I think that they actually are very nakedly just trying to take advantage of Western morality and get away with something that they know we wouldn't otherwise approve of.
yeah. I mean, Putin, he must have suspected that there's no way he could have persuaded, or any of his justification would have persuaded the West media and elites. So he might have just kind of thrown it out just to be curious to see what their response would be. I don't know.
Well, I don't think, yeah. Yeah. But of course, also, it's like, what's it? The Putin hate and all that sort of thing is like, like the Russophobia. I'd say it's better to say, because like, it's like, what's it? Like it. The Russophobia is obviously like a bit stupid, but also like the Putin philia is also like obviously stupid, because what's it like Putin can't even maintain the border between Russia and Kazakhstan, so
Yeah, but at the same time, don't be fooled into rejecting him and supporting Ukraine. Just take a neutral stance between the two.
Yeah, no, as I said previously, and as I probably will say a lot, it's like, on the one hand, Russia needs Ukraine in order to make its borders more defensible, because they basically, Ukraine is like a giant funnel that leads directly to Russia, and it's all flat land, and it's very easy to invade, either in summer or winter, of course, because that's when the ground is hard. You never want to try invading during the autumn or spring, because that's when it's all mud and horrible.
Yeah.
People joke about it. It's like, oh, you should never invade Russia in the winter. That's stupid. That's not actually true. The Mongols succeeded in conquering Russia during the winter several times.
Were they the only
The
force that managed to conquer the whole of Russia, or most of it?
Yeah, but the thing is, you have to keep in mind about the Mongols is that they almost made Russia sort of like as it exists today, because like at the time that the Mongols conquered the Kievan Rus, the Kievan Rus didn't control nearly as much territory as the later nation of Russia that would come into existence after the collapse of the Mongol Empire.
Yeah.
Or, of course, as they were known in that particular time and that particular place, the Tartars.
Well,
yes.
Yes. Well, I think
Yes.
they must have been the most successful, surely, out of all of the powers, in an attempt to invade Russia and actually occupy it. But
Yeah.
to be fair, though, did they just abandon or sort of leave the places to do their own thing as long as they were subordinate to Genghis Khan?
It's kind of like with the breakup of the Mongol Empire, it's kind of like they like forgot about it a bit. Like it was that when Genghis Khan died, and the guy had like 100 wives and thousands of concubines and hundreds of thousands of children as a result. So, each and every one of these princes and princesses had like a roughly equal claim to the throne, and they were all like contesting, rather politely, it must be said. They didn't usually go to full out, civil war over it, but basically, it's like each one wanted to be in charge, and eventually, they just ended up carving out their own little states here and there, like the Islamic Golden Horde, which was like a massive caliphate for ages and ages, was originally part of the Mongol Empire, and the reason why that came into existence is because the Mongols were remarkably religiously tolerant, and so, wherever they moved, they tended to get assimilated into the native culture and convert to whatever the local religion was.
Yeah. I guess you could say
although,
that
but of course, yeah.
He just undermined himself by having so many children, because he is the reason why his empire collapsed after his death.
Yes. Well, also, there's the fact that, of course, the Mongols being, like hard people of the steppes that were used to eating, there was it basically just in their culture, eating a lot of food was more acceptable than it was in other cultures because they were working all the darn time. So what do you think happens when you get these massive Mongol empires and they don't work nearly as hard as they used to, but they're still eating an absolute feast every single day and drinking lots and lots of alcohol?
Yeah, they die, or they just become fat.
You end up with high rates of obesity and gout and all sorts of nonsense like that. I believe that with the Qing dynasty in China at one point there was like a warlord that was like famously obese, and one of the things that he was more infamous for was that he got into an affair with one of the emperor's concubines.
Mm.
where she would apparently, because he was so fat, she would apparently dress him up like a baby or something and humiliate him.
That's a sorry state of affairs for an emperor.
Well, he wasn't the emperor. It was what's it? It was warlord. It was one of the emperor's like lieutenants in
sorry,
the
yeah.
military.
Hmm.
It was one of his generals.
Yeah, well, this is the thing with so many empires, isn't it? You have the group of people who struggle for power, and then once they have it, they and there's nothing to compete with them for it. They just become sort of slip into decadence and eventually lose it. It seems to be an inevitable cycle in history.
and you know, and who remains afterward? Like
Well,
the humble farmers, basically,
mhm.
is the only, you know, like what, like there's an old Mongol proverb, and it's that what's it? The happiest place on earth is an empty steppe.
Yeah,
And where that comes from is that, you know, the you know, because all of the like really ambitious Mongols that would have gone and, you know, about conquering and stuff ended up either dying of obesity or dying in battle, or they ended up getting assimilated into foreign cultures.
yeah,
And you know, the only remnant really was like these slightly meek like shepherds, basically, out in the hinterlands that were just content to, you know, just roam about in the wilderness with the sheep and goats.
yeah. It tends always to be the elites who are displaced in these changing of empires, rather than
Oh yeah,
the farmers. You know, the common people. They remain, and their ways
oh
remain.
yeah. Yeah, well, you know, like, you know, one of the most famous examples of this, gosh, we've worked ourselves into a complete tangent. I'm not sure that we'll address anything that we were originally supposed to, but this is
No.
fun,
Oh
so
well.
let's keep going.
Oh,
Yeah.
and I'm gonna run out
Is,
of battery. Hold on. Uh oh.
oh, you
Keep
know,
speaking.
get the charge cord.
It's not charging properly. Oh no. That might be out in a second.
Oh no. Blast it. We might have to swap laptops, because don't you have like a whole collection?
I have like an antique collection of them. Yeah. Of they're all bad, but through using all of them, they may
Well, I've only
eventually
got the
work.
one, and it's bad, so yeah. Okay, so I guess I might as well keep trying to entertain the audience. So, you know, as I was saying, you know, like an excellent sort of example of how the elites always get swapped out, but the ordinary people usually remain the same is, of course, Egypt. You know, where like basically the peasant farmers of Egypt and the nomads are basically, it's always the same people. You know, the Berbers have been wandering around the desert in North Africa for ages, and the Fellahin had been farming in the swamps and stuff on, you know, on the riverbanks in Egypt for thousands of years. And, you know, basically the people in charge is the only thing that ever changes. You know, it's
Mm.
But of course, you know, like basically the whole history of Egypt is, you know, like it starts off with like, you know, the native Egyptian empire springs up. It lasts for a few hundred years, but then it gets conquered by some foreign invaders who didn't have much of a culture of their own, so they settle into the native culture, adding only one or two new things.
Yeah.
And then they get a bit content and decadent, and then they get conquered by some foreign people. And the process this process has repeated itself basically, you know, the past 5,000 years for all of Egyptian
Yeah.
history, even into the time before writing, as far as we're aware.
Yeah, and the
And
hard thing is to
yeah.
go on, finish your point.
Oh, well, no, the thing that I was just gonna say, you know, and like even into relatively recent history, you know, like even with the like the Greeks even at one point had a stab at it and conquered Egypt, and that's where the famous like Cleopatra's whole dynasty, I think it was like 7 generations or something of Egyptian rulers, were of almost completely Greek genetic heritage.
Mm. Yeah.
There's actually a joke about it in one of the old Cleopatra movies. You know, the old. I think it not the original because the original was black and white, but like one of the nice ones from the 50s or whatever, where you know when Cleopatra meets Julius Caesar, she says, what's it? She talks about it's like, oh, how you love almost all Greek things, and I'm an almost entirely Greek thing, or something like that.
Something I struggle with is whether we've kind of entered into a new sort of, I don't want to call it, you know, the end of history narrative, which is obviously wrong, but I feel like with the kind of new introduction of new technologies, of the changing situation, of the unprecedented situation that we have entered in, does this not change anything in regards to the cycle of the collapse of empires and that sort of thing? Would it not make
Yeah,
their
it's
I want
yeah.
obviously I'm not going to say they'll last forever. Of course not. They will eventually die, but it feels like something this case is
Yeah.
different.
Well, the culture kind of did die in the year 2000.
Yeah. I mean the actual empires, the structure,
Yeah.
the gay, as many people call it.
Yeah, and so, yeah. No, and it's like, yeah, I do agree, you know, like the structures and all that. That'll certainly change over time, you know, but it doesn't feel that way in the way that it used to.
Mm.
Because we don't have these like great leaps in cultural evolution the way that we did back in the, you know, starting of course with the 1920s, and then after the Depression, you know, in the post-war era, you know, again with the 50s, the 60s, the 70s. You know, these are all very unique decades with unique aesthetics that don't just vary from decade to decade, but even from country to country across the world. You know,
that's a very good
the
point.
70s in England looked much different from the 70s in America.
And that's the thing. That's a really good point, because we seem to have almost culturally stalled. I don't know if that's the case with the decline of empires, but sort of 10 years ago there really
Well,
wasn't
it's
that
not
much
exactly,
in terms of, there really wasn't that much in terms of very much different from 2010 to now.
I'd say superhero movies are the only cultural like thing that really defines the 20 teens.
Yeah, it's got to be to do with the internet, I would suppose, because things are just moving so fast through this.
Yes, and I feel like the 2020s will be the decade of a star rises in Asia, or is what we might call it, you know, because a Squid Game, you know, was very influential, and this has sort of sparked a huge interest in other Korean dramas. You know, so I feel like Korea and of course, you know, like Japan, you know, anime has been popular since the 90s.
Korean TV? I can't think of any that we've watched recently.
Yeah, well, Squid Game is kind of the only one, but
yeah,
it has kind of defined, like, it's probably going to define our entire generation, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the thing. It's anime and manga. You can dunk on it a lot, but it seems to have just been culturally far more effective than any Western TV or whatever that we have today. It's sort of that culture swooped in. I guess as our own culture declines, we sort of draw on others for our own entertainment.
Yeah, and you know what? To a certain degree, I kind of just feel like, it's all fair game. You know, like, am I a bit sad to see American culture dying? Yeah, but like, well, like, you gotta. It's like this probably isn't much different from how Japanese people felt in the 50s and 60s. You know, with America practically colonizing their whole country.
Yeah, they're almost having it back at them, although it's a slightly Americanized version, of course, to appeal to the American audience.
Yeah. But of course the thing is, you know, it's like it's getting to be less and less Americanized all the time, you know? Like when you look at anime in the 80s, it was much more Americanized than anime is today.
Yeah.
even though anime had much less of a mainstream American following than it does today.
Mm.
It's well, I guess basically that's just because, like Japan has a stronger cultural identity today than it did in the 80s, and with America, it's the exact opposite.
Yeah, and with Europe, this same trend has really been happening.
Yeah.
Which is why people mainly um, in Europe are sort of drawing on, like with Americans with anime, other cultures, or just some sort of
Mm.
have some sort of they have no self-confidence in their own nation because,
Yes.
I mean, what is their own
Yes.
nation at this point?
And you know what? This sort of makes me think about because I just finished reading what's I reading? It was an audiobook, but I just got through Crime and Punishment recently.
Hmm.
And one thing that you notice with a lot of the Dostoevsky books is that basically the state of Russia in the sort of late imperial period, shortly after the emancipation of the Slavs, not the Slavs,
The
the
serfs,
serfs.
yeah.
Yes, yes, yes. Basically, the state of Russia at that time, it was like a weird combination of like rampant optimism and utter cultural decay. Because they adopted all these sort of Western values. Of course, like a Western dress and fashion and technology was first adopted under Peter the Great.
Mm.
But the deeper moral values came to be adopted, several decades later, with the emancipation of the
Yeah,
serfs.
with Alexander the
And
Second.
yes, um, and well, what was I saying? Oh yes, it's, where was I? I've not lost my train of thought, but well, basically, oh yes, it's like when you read these books, basically you get an idea of like a 19th century version of the Globo Homo.
Mm.
Like what's it like? Everyone in like all of the Western world, and all of like like from Moscow to London, practically is wearing the exact same three-piece suit. The slacks, waistcoat, blazer. Well, not exactly a blazer. The blazer is more an artifact of the 20th century, but it would have been like what's it's that they all wore almost the exact same. It was the like loose fitting dress pants. The waistcoat and the the larger the overcoat.
Mm.
And hold on, hold on.
I mean, as always, these trends are far more observable in the cities. So in the 1800s, I'm sure um, these kind of these cultural trends wouldn't have been very prevalent at all in the rural areas, even in the sort of suburban areas that whatever as they existed in the 1800s. Um, an interesting thing as well in that century is the kind of rise of um, I mean, it happened a lot before as well with the absolutist monarchs and that sort of thing. Um, oh, you back?
Yeah.
Were you going to finish your point, or I can carry on with mine if you would like?
Carry on.
Sorry, I didn't mean for you to mute yourself, but anyway, like these absolutist monarchs who came in, they in a way were attempting to draw on some kind of reactionary past, but at the same time they kind of viewed themselves as they had to centralize all power within themselves, which is really what the medieval monarchs had. An interesting story about this was with Apostolic Majesty, where he talks about kind of the way I think his discussions with Sargon about classical liberalism and that sort of
Yes.
thing. It's these they were wearing the skin, these absolutists, but they weren't actually. They were very pale imitations of them. Using yes, and they were obviously still, as we said, these monarchs. They were sort of slowly but surely losing their association and ties with the church. We should remember that the loss of religion didn't start in the sort of 20th century. It really started in the 19th, in sort of late 19th century, where people. It wasn't so much as the actual authority of the church diminished. It was just the indifference slowly began to arise. People just sort of lost interest and faith.
Yes.
And yeah, I just think we should of course not be always looking at sort of the era before then with rose tinted glasses, but neither should we look at the 1800s with those same glasses, because there were, as we said, some problems with it and their perceptions.
Yeah, you know, so what's like all the sort of like vernacular clothing, we might call it, of all these different parts of the world, you know, like, because like in the more medieval era, you know, or not even just in the medieval era, just even as far back as like the 1700s, you know, Hungarians dressed in a very particular way, Germans dressed in a very particular way, you know, the lederhosen and all that sort of thing. You know, like even the British and the Scots would have dressed very differently. You know, the kilt, for instance, was worn as a much more casual item of clothing in Scotland at that time period, you know, in the 1700s as compared to the 1800s.
I'm sorry to have derailed your conversation to a more general point. Sorry, we were talking about clothing, weren't we? I forgot. Sort of went on a tangent.
No, that's how I initially started, and the tangent that we went on was rather brilliant. Goodness. Now, the only trouble is, you know, this has been like a lovely tangent and all that sort of thing. Do we want to address the point that I was making earlier about, about like rights versus responsibilities?
Yes, that was the original talking point, wasn't it?
Yes, I hope that the audience isn't. I hope that this is as engaging for them as it is for us.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, it's not. I'm
Um,
sure they haven't learned very much from this, but it's more just. I hope you know, you can put in your own thoughts in the comments and all of that, and you can follow along with our thought processes, I suppose. It's as much as journey for us as it is for our audience
yes.
intellectually.
Now, as I was sort of, yes, now sort of as I was saying a bit earlier, you know, is basically I just feel like I don't know, perhaps the point isn't nearly as long or profound, you know, looking at it now as I initially thought it was when I sort of first formulated it, but basically I just feel like, you know, like when the time comes to like actually write sort of like legal-ish stuff, I get, you know, like official articles or whatever for Dawnshire.
Back in a moment.
I feel like as a framing device, it would be good to like draw a very strict, you know, like here's the like what's like the responsibilities first and foremost, you know, like it is the honorable duty of every citizen of Dawnshire to what's it, to be honest and to tell the truth, you know, so that so that nobody, you know, so that nobody operates under any false pretenses, most especially that you know, the leaders of Dawnshire be spoken to what's it?
I'm so sorry, I missed about the last 30 seconds of your point.
Oh, sorry. So like I was just saying, you know, it's like there ought to be like in the Constitution, we might call it, of Dawnshire. I feel like instead of starting it off with like rights, the way that the American Constitution does, it'd be better to start it off, you know, like I was saying, with responsibilities. You know, like it is the right honorable duty of all citizens of Dawnshire to to tell the truth and speak their minds, most especially with regards to the leaders of Dawnshire. You know, something because operating under false pretenses, even for politeness sake, even for even out of civility, may cause like great harm, something or other. It's like
Yeah.
basically it's just it's like the truth is sort of important in and of itself, and so rather than just saying like, oh, the citizens of Dawnshire have a right to freedom of speech, I'd
Mm.
say it's like, well, yeah, obviously, but like even more than that, the citizens of Dawnshire have a responsibility to express themselves, so that way, basically, just so that nothing ever is like boiling under the surface, just so that we don't sort of build up. Well, I guess just to stop the accumulation of what we might call intellectual plaque, maybe.
Well, we have very sort of decayed versions and empty
Basically, is
versions
yeah.
of these now, with sort of in regards to your everyone should have responsibility to speak out against the government. It's the way
Oh
that
yeah, like
it's been
yeah,
vented
the
towards.
media LARPs as the
Mm,
as the fifth estate and all that sort of thing, but they don't actually do anything.
yeah, I mean, what has this responsibility turned into? It's more now, for example, Partygate. We're up in
Mm-hmm.
arms. We're up in arms. Boris Johnson has parties or whatever. He there's all these sorts of things. It's very useless and a distraction um, from actually holding government to account.
Yeah.
And I just wonder how you would.
It's like a parody of
Mm,
keeping
yeah,
government to account.
yeah. I just wonder how
No,
how
it's
you could do this
yeah.
effectively um, in sort of a positive, like a Dawnshire in Dawnshire.
I don't exactly know, but like you gotta put the idea out there. So that way just so that way it's sort of present and everybody's sort of thinking about it so they
Yeah.
can actually take care of it later on.
Mm. Well, I think I'll spoil slightly some of the essay. Um, I make a distinction in terms of when I set out a positive vision. One of the things, the essences, I think I called it, was to do with localism, and it's simply that I make a distinction between the seen politician and the unseen politician.
Mm.
Modern politicians tend to sort of they maybe travel once to their constituency, to their local district, and
Uh-huh.
they barely the average person barely sees them because they're too preoccupied with party
Yes.
politics and
Yes.
sort of and sort of wide national matters rather than the issues that actually affect their constituency. And obviously the mass
Yes.
and in democracy, um,
The mass and
the mass
scale.
yes people are focused towards the party, those party politics, those little the PMQs like we have in this country, prime minister's questions. It's all very sort of disattached from our own affairs, as in the locality, as people focus on things that really don't affect their own daily lives.
Yes.
So it's a sort of
Yeah.
a positive vision would have my going back to my main point. A positive vision would have sort of the seen politician, someone who is seen, and I think you're far more capable of holding people to account if they are a
Yeah.
genuine and active part of your community.
Well, that's what's it like one policy proposal essentially that I have. Probably ought to write it down at some point, but it's recorded here at least in this video. Is basically that like what's it like government officials and that sort of thing basically ought to be like it's literally just like you know like you're talking I was talking you know like about patriarchs and matriarchs effectively if like it's effectively just like the oldest sane member of a given family gets to represent that family politically.
Yeah.
And you know, so basically that would just be like the way that I guess what we might call like electors or whatever are appointed,
Yeah.
and then those electors get to because like that way you're not just bringing civic activity into like it's not just the politician lives down the street or whatever. It's the politician or not politician because that's sort of a dirty word, you know, but like the official, the representative is literally a member of the household.
Yeah. And they have
It's literally your dear old Nan.
and they have, going back to your
It's literally your
original
grandpa.
point, they have a responsibility to represent their family, to uphold what the kind of desires of their family and their concerns, and to raise that to
Yes.
the steward.
Yes. And well, I suppose, you know, and not even just the steward, you know, like theoretically, you know, because the steward is supposed to be like the leader and guardian of all of Dawnshire. You know, theoretically, his attention won't actually be needed most of the time. Theoretically, you know, like if there's just a problem or whatever that only affects one village, then it would just be like the local sheriff or whatever that would have the that would take care of the thing.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, to minimise the
yeah, well,
amount
I
of
get.
issues
Oh, yeah.
the
So like,
steward would have to deal with,
yes,
since it's far more they're
yes,
over a far more national area rather than the sheriff, who interacts with much more
yes.
um, in their own community. So I go on.
Yes. Well, also, I guess is like you know, because you mentioned it's like people already have sort of a responsibility to take care of their families. That sort of reminds me is like you know is I think that this is a good way of solving lots of problems, you know, because like you know, like currently the left talking about like, oh, we want to lower the voting age to 16 or whatever because it's unfair that these you know like young people are unrepresented. And it's like, well, that solves the problem because you know, like on the one hand, you've got somebody who's in their 60s. They're certainly old enough to make political decisions, but at the same time, you know, it's like you know they love their families. You know that they're you know do their best to fairly represent the members of their family, including the young people. Um, you know, so I guess I feel like that solves a lot of problems with suffrage, but also, you know, it's like it sort of solves the problem of what's it called? Nepotism as well. Because rather than trying to engineer a system that has to resist nepotism, we basically like this system that I've proposed of having the like the patriarchs and matriarchs basically just takes advantage of the nepotistic instincts in human beings and basically says it's like, oh yeah, you want to do what's best for your family. So as a result, they're going to make you know like decent decisions in the great councils or whatever.
Yeah, and they're very open about it rather than just saying, rather than just it being discreet and behind the curtain. It's not. It's not secretly
Yeah,
being
you know, like if
nepotistic.
it,
It's just.
yeah,
It's
you know, like
genuine.
if somebody, you know, like if somebody's like, oh well, I'd like to petition for a bit of an iron subsidy because you know I've got two nephews, you know, who work in the you know, who work as blacksmiths down at the watermill. And what you know, it's a slightly expensive profession, you know. We hardly, you know, it's what's there's hardly any, you know, what's it? And the mines don't quite produce as much iron, you know. So it'd be nice if we could import a little bit or whatever, you know. And it's like, it would be fine. It would be honest. We would know exactly what their interests are, you know. It's literally just they got somebody in their family they're trying to take care of.
Yeah.
Um, but of course, I guess that we do have to be careful with this to a certain degree because we don't want this to devolve into like African style like clan infighting because in Africa you have it where those sorts of like nepotism is basically enshrined as like a moral good, and the result is basically rank incompetence at every level of government because people just put their family in charge of stuff.
Yeah. I guess an overall point, which is I've actually been thinking about for a while, is since I read this book, The Evils of Revolution by Edmund Burke, he made an interesting point,
Mm.
that when criticising the French Revolution, he was sort of saying this is they're kind of conceiving of every little aspect of government, and politics, and society, and how it should be ran and function. And I
They're
think,
not letting nature take its course.
yes, I think there's a certain with Dawnshire, we shouldn't. I think we shouldn't be planning, every aspect of it, and we should just try and, if it ever comes to fruition,
We
create
shouldn't
it.
be such autistic Germans about it. We ought to let
Yeah.
nature take its course to a
Mm.
certain degree. We need to have a
Hmm.
firm foundation, and that's all well and good.
Yeah.
But, it's like, take care, attend to the big things.
Mm. Yes, and there may be flaws. It may not be perfect at first, and no system can be, but we'll sort of, I guess the
We'll iron that out as we go.
yeah, and just slowly evolve into the sort of a decent system that works.
Yeah, yeah. I suppose, it's like, what's in that case, the only thing, it's like the thing what we ought to, like, take most attention to is just, what's it? The only flaws that you can't let sort of work themselves out in that way, I'd say, would be like a fatal flaws. Like if you start off with like the premise, I suppose. It's like we've got to make sure that our base most premise is something that can work. In which case, it's like you might say it's like, oh, is it the steward or something? And I'd say no, it's not even that. I would say the base most premise of Dawnshire, even beneath everything, is, well, you know what is like we it probably should be Christ or something, or God at the very least. So we might want to rework things slightly, but the base most premise as Dawnshire stands currently is just well, I feel like it's something to do with like the moral value of hard work for one thing. And the moral and the sort of the spiritual wholesomeness of a connection to nature. Would you say that's fair to say?
Yeah, yeah, I would say so. It's
It's like
we've got to
we
like find the
what's it? We are
fundamental spirit
anti-modern, not
between it and within
anti-technological.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, well, like like the thing, and I'd say like a thing, we need to be careful with, because I feel like West Wavelin kind of humbled us a bit, when he was talking about modern medicine. We need to be careful and very deliberate in making the point that we are anti-modern, not anti-technology.
Mm. It's not a desire to reverse all of the progresses made. It's a sort of desire to deal with it in a wholesome way.
Yeah. And also, it's like what's and it's like not have unnecessary things, it's well, no, I would say, what, no, you're right. It's the emphasis, it's not even on the getting rid of unnecessary things. It's absolutely just on wholesome things, because I would say it's like, what it's actually like, no, because to just get rid of unnecessary things, like there's a lot of, although there is a large degree to which modernity adds unnecessary things, there's also a large degree to which it cuts out the heart of things as well. There's a large degree to which modernity, um, it is sort of stark and utilitarian in its own way as well, and we don't just want to do that, but backwards. It's Well, I suppose, as I said once before, like, not everything in this material world is profane. We don't want to commit something like a Gnostic heresy by accident. When we,
Yeah.
like, we need to be careful to like call out the bad things specifically, not just to call out and like not just to work against an entire whopping massive category of things.
Mm. There are, yes, there's a time and place for technologies, and there's a time and place for all these sorts of things.
Yeah.
There are some, indeed, pieces of technology maybe that you can think of, like smartphones, which shouldn't be so commonly used. Um, but
Yeah,
that's
like what, like texting. Like, I see the merits of texting, and I see the merits of the camera, and I see the merits of, like, like being able to like call and talk to people halfway across the world. But I don't
mm,
really see the merits of like much beyond those three things.
yeah, as yeah, I find it incredibly sad when I see children making sort of becoming addicted to these phones and sort of
Yes.
using it as their primary mode of communication.
Yes. Now, this has been a lovely conversation. Uh, I suspect my family will be needing me very soon, though. So, how's about if we didn't do it yesterday? How's about we get to the comment thread on that
Ah, yes.
Noland Knows video? The one that I was telling you about
Hmm.
yesterday, where I got a bit ticked off at
Yeah.
somebody
Can I just say that's
because
a very good
basically.
search list you had there. The top one, Jesus is King.
Ah, yes. Well, that was, the classic Kanye
Yeah,
album.
yeah.
Probably one of the only rap albums that I like.
Hmm.
Jack Hardgreaves, or not Hardgreaves, Hargreaves, Old Country. Gonna wake. That's just a silly meme. Fallout, Wyoming, because I love the Fallout games, but I'm a bit sad that there's not one that takes place in Wyoming.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean,
Okay,
the
so
problem
yes,
is
here. Yes.
the problem is just having it centered around basically the middle of nowhere. Anyway, carry on.
No, the reason why that you'd want to make a Fallout Wyoming game is because in Fallout New Vegas there was a faction called the Great Khans. They're sort of Mongol inspired, and they, like, in sort of the credits or whatever, in the sort of like the pre-credit, like the what's it, sort of story cards at the end of the game. Yeah. Oh.
Well,
Yeah, so it
oh
appears that
yes.
my family does need me right now, so I'll just show you the. I have to go over this very, very quickly. So basically, I feel like I made one of my classic points here, talking about how I feel like in 100 years, Africa will be sending humanitarian aid to Europe. And second point, like the Moors of old, they shall remark, the further north you go, the less civilized these people become. And then this person was like, when did the Moors ever send aid to Europe? And then I had to correct him. You misunderstood me. The Moors only remarked, these damn barbarians get even more savage the further north you go. I'm quite aware that the Moors were conquerors and never did any good for Europe, save it were perhaps the musical influence they had on the Spanish. Uh, and then this person just made a point that I didn't care to address. And then this person, Benjamin Crump, said, no, Africa will collapse. Their per capita innovation is lower than Europe. Look at Zimbabwe, South Africa. Whites are synonymous with infrastructure in Africa. And then Nolan says, comes to my defense slightly. He says, define collapse and do Netflix and cosplay count as white innovation? Because yeah, Nolan is a very good, lovely right-wing man, but very similar to me. He is kind of disgusted with the state of the West right now. And then I, just said, it was like, hey, look at Rwanda. they got like clean cities and all that sort of thing. But I really have to sign off now. My family needs me.
Well, I will see you later then. Nice chatting as always.
Yeah, so I suppose yeah. Sorry for the rushed wrap up. I suppose you can share with the audience what you think of that whole little comment thread, and let's just sign off. Obama's got 500,000 YouTube subscribers. Together we can change this. By which I mean, so what's it? Together, one day we have more YouTube subscribers.
Indeed.
Signing off. Goodbye.
Well, he did say I could add some points, but I think it's probably best I leave it there as well. So I hope you enjoyed this. Basically, what was it, hour and 10? Sorry, an hour of tangents, literally going on and on and on. I hope you have gained some sort of small value out of that, and I suppose we'll see you all for the next Truckcast, or Trucklaw, or whatever is uploaded next, if I ever get round to editing it, um, in my usual poor fashion. So yes, goodbye everyone. Have a lovely rest of your week. God bless.